The Epstein affair, definitely. I noticed one thing is when I'm Googling things related to the Epstein file, I don't get the answer.
No,
so
no.
I kind of like almost giving up on Googling things there. I actually use AI, both Grok and the Chinese DeepSeek and Doubao, those kind of a thing to get my information. So just give you an example. This morning, I was trying to find out, they redacted, the 6 people, right? And so now that those people are being unredacted, I was looking for information about those 6 guys. I can't find anything, just Googling.
Anything. Yeah.
They don't tell me anything.
No.
They keep on just popping up Ro Connor's announcement of those 6 individuals. But I need more information about who they really are rather than just their names, right?
Exactly.
And even like the spelling of their names, but I don't find anything.
No, I know. Exactly.
So I have to go to Grok, and even Grok it's always claim it's very busy. Maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe everybody's Googling there. I don't know. But finally, I find some more information from the Chinese, like a DeepSeek and Doubao, like Chinese AI.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So interesting.
Yeah. So they are nervous. I mean, like you said, that they are uncomfortable, to say the least.
To say the least, yes.
Okay, let's start with Xi Jinping's talk to. Last time we talked a little bit about his conversation with Putin, but then shortly after he had another conversation with Trump. So what is your take on all these? It's unusual, isn't it?
It is extremely unusual. And again, there's a lot of speculation about who initiated the call. I have no doubt that it was Trump.
Okay.
I don't think it was Xi Jinping. As we've discussed before, as you've told me before, it's extremely unusual for Xi Jinping to initiate a call like that.
Yeah.
So I suspect the Americans, Trump himself, are getting nervous about the whole situation. Trump saw that Putin and Xi Jinping had spoken. So, of course, he wants to get his own word in. It's very typical of the way Trump is. Now, I don't know what you made of the readout, but it seemed to me that it was once again one of those lectures by Xi Jinping. I don't mean to be, I don't mean to overstate things. But I think again, Xi Jinping trying to explain for the 103rd time to American leaders what China is all about, what the relationship should be all about, why we need to move away from confrontation and all of these things. And again, I get the sense that the Americans, all of the Western leaders, when they hear all of this, they respond with cliches, but they never actually address the substance of it. So when you look at Putin's and Xi's discussion, it's full of practical things. I mean, they're talking about cooperation in science and technology, in aerospace, in energy issues, and it's all very practical. When you look at what the West talks about, it's not even abstract. I mean, that would be giving more dignity to it than one really should. It's basically the usual regurgitation of the same memes and points that they always say when they talk to the Chinese, which is, of course, we love you, we love your country, we want to be on good terms with it. We are absolutely thrilled and excited to have this thing move forward with you. But you know that there's no real sincerity or truth behind it.
Yeah, the substance thing is so case on point when you were saying that, because even like Lithuania, Lithuania, they changed the Taipei office to change name into Taiwan office. And of course, that happened, I think, 3-4 years ago. And China was very angry about that. So China pretty much cut their projects and trade and all that with Lithuania. Fine, right? I mean, China is totally fine with that, but Lithuania now is getting more and more unhappy about that because Lithuania actually, let's face it needs China investment and all that. So Lithuania now with the new leader and this and that, they are constantly coming out to saying they want to improve the relationship with China. And yet they never address the root problem, which is why don't you just change that name back to Taipei office? They don't do that. They kept on saying they want to have conversation, they want to improve the relationship, but they just don't do anything.
Exactly. I mean, in fact, the foreign minister said that Lithuania threw itself in front of the train when it made that decision. So that's a very dramatic statement, a very, very dramatic statement. Lithuania made a terrible mistake, but they won't fix the mistake. No, exactly. They can't do that, apparently. I mean, again, one wonders why. One wonders what makes it so difficult. But anyway, they don't.
And they still expect that they could get what they want. How stupid can you be, right? It's very clear you're the one who needs China more than China needs you. And yet, somehow they still believe they can talk their way out of this. It's just...
Yes, that's exactly what they think they can do. They can tell China that we made a huge mistake. It was our terrible mistake. We realized what a terrible mistake it was. Forgive us, restore all our contacts, but just don't expect us to do anything.
Yeah,
I mean that's what they think. Westerners always think in this way. They assume somehow that it's a privilege. They're granting a privilege to others to trade and deal with them. And even the Lithuanians, incredibly, are vulnerable to this type of thinking. I suspect also that the Lithuanians aren't going to change it because they know that it's going to be that the Americans won't like it, that there's going to be a disapproval from the United States and from some people in the European Union, people like Kaja Kallas. So they're not going to change it. They're not going to do anything, but they still want China to forgive them.
Yeah. Well, it seems like they were, when they did this, they were expecting the European Unions and the US will be very happy about this, and I guess compensate them somehow for the money lost from angering China. But they get nothing out of it, right? They realize that now, 4 years later, 3-4 years later, that they get nothing from the US or the European Union. So
yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, they did it. The real reason they did it is because they thought that it would show to the United States what utterly loyal and fervid allies they are, and that the Americans would give them a reward, just like, you know, a dog acts to get its owner's attention in the hope that it will get a bone. But of course, the Americans, as they repeatedly show, I mean, when countries behave like this, they will be pleased, they will be happy, they will pocket it, but it doesn't follow that they're going to give anything in return. And I mean, what can they do? I mean, if Lithuania had sense, it would have maintained very good relations with China. And it would have come to the Americans if the Americans had complained about it and said, look, we're getting all of this help from China. If you want us to be more on your side, then give us help too. Give us things in return. And, if you do that, well, then, that will balance out the relationship with China. If Lithuania did something like that, then that would be a more intelligent game and a more proper game for a small country, a sovereign country to play. But of course, the Lithuanians never think in that way. Far too many people in Europe never think in that way.
Do you think the fact that those three Baltic countries, not just Lithuania, after they joined NATO, they're very much emboldened and they do things more recklessly, I find?
That's exactly what happened. Now, actually, interestingly enough, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who's been very busy over the last week giving interviews. Anyway, he actually discussed all of this. He says that in the early 2000s, when, remember, Russia was a very weak country and it wasn't really, it didn't even have a good relationship with China at that time. And China wasn't yet the great power that it is today. Anyway, the Russians came along and said, this doesn't look to us like a good idea. Do you really want to bring the Baltic states into NATO? Do you understand what that means, what the effect of that is going to be? And the Americans apparently came along to the Russians and said, look, don't worry. The reason we are bringing the Baltic states into NATO is because we understand that they have these enormous issues and complexes and paranoia about you. So if we bring them into NATO, they won't need to be so afraid of you anymore.
Okay.
And that will lead to your relations with them improving.
Yeah.
And Lavrov's comment about that was, well, we see what actually happened. And it's exactly what you said. I mean, the Baltic states are structured now to be feverishly, ferociously anti-Russian.
Yeah.
By the way, the history of the Baltic states is more complex than people know. For example, during the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks were very popular in the Baltic states, just to say, especially in Latvia. And Lenin's guard, just to say, was made up of Latvians mostly, just a fact which isn't very widely known. Anyway, but today, the Baltic states enormously hostile to Russia for all kinds of reasons. And of course, what they said to themselves, now that we're in NATO, we can be as horrible to the Russians as we want to be. We can be as aggressive to the Russians as we want to be. And we are going to keep everybody on side. And if we get into any trouble with the Russians, we have NATO and the United States, and they will come to our rescue. So it did exactly what you said. It makes them much more bolder and far more aggressive.
Which is not a good idea for them. I think it's
it's a terrible idea for them. It means that the Baltic states, as I think some of them are beginning to understand, and it's making them very nervous and, by the way, even more aggressive. The Baltic states are now relying for their security on a great power, which is a continent and an ocean away, whilst having simultaneously destroyed their relations with the great power which is on their doorstep. I mean, it isn't wise at all. I mean, they should absolutely have worked to develop good and friendly relations with the Russians. In the long term, there is only one country that is in a position to guarantee the independence of the Baltic states. That's not America, which is far, far away. It is Russia, which is their neighbor. And the way you do that is by having very good relations so that the Russians have no interest or concern in taking them over, which it wouldn't in the normal course of things. They're tiny places, by the way. I'm about to visit one of them in June, by the way, just briefly, Estonia. But they're tiny, tiny places. They're not of any great interest to the Russians at all.
And I think to a certain degree, Poland is the same, I think. The latest one, I find it's amazing that regarding Epstein, it's Poland is going to investigate somehow Epstein is working for Russia. Are you serious?
Well, indeed. Are you serious? Absolutely. I mean, it's a ridiculous story which originated in London.
Yeah.
London, the British have been very badly burnt by the Epstein scandal because so many people in Britain were involved with Epstein, and we're still discovering more and more people who were involved, including one of Starmer's other parliamentary aides, just to say. So the British are very embarrassed by it. So they set the story going, and the Poles, of course, had to jump in. A very, very bad idea. The one thing I would say is that, unlike the Baltic states, Poland is it's a real country. It's got a population of, 30 million, 40, I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
And I happen to know, because I've got a lot of friends there, that there is an active debate in Poland about all of this. And many people in Poland are saying, is this a good idea? Is this something we want to be involved in? Shouldn't we ourselves look to repair our relations with the Russians? And so this is more controversial in Poland than it is in the Baltic states.
Okay.
It probably because Poland, as I said, is a real country, and it doesn't feel as threatened and as vulnerable as the Baltic states do.
Well, hopefully they come to their senses, because clearly there has been Eastern European girls being trafficked to by and to Epstein. So I do think they should investigate, but don't make it like everything about Russia. It's just so wrong.
That's absolutely correct. Can I just say something else? It's good that you used the word East European girls, because living in London and knowing what I do, when you read about Russian girls being involved, the word Russian is often a label for East European.
Okay.
So even Polish girls, I happen to know from some of my friends in the police, this is from some time back, were being trafficked as Russian girls at one time.
Okay. We will come back to the Epstein. U.S. and Russia now, what's the latest about this strategic weapon treaty thing? Because it seems like the U.S. is a little bit open for negotiation. Is that right?
Well, they say that they are, but I don't think the Russians believe them. My own sense is that over the last week, 2 weeks, the Russians have come to the conclusion that the relationship between Russia and the United States is getting worse. Lavrov said this in a recent interview, and has no future. The Russians thought they had achieved some kind of an understanding with Trump in this Anchorage summit. They've noticed that Trump hasn't moved forward with any of that. They've seen Trump talk about better economic relations with Russia. Instead, all the Russians have received our sanctions. So I think the Russians are very skeptical now about anything that the Americans come up with or say. And last year, Putin said, well, let's sit down and have talks about strategic stability and about nuclear weapons. This is an extremely big priority. Let's agree to observe the limits of the New START treaty for at least another year, to give ourselves time to see how we can move forward. And the Americans refused and said no. So Trump is now coming forward and saying that he wants a new and better treaty. He's in effect accusing the Russians of violating the START treaty. He said that the START treaty was grossly violated. The other party to the treaty is Russia. So he's, in a sense, saying that the Russians violated the START treaty. Of course, being Donald Trump, he doesn't tell us how. He just says it. So I don't think the Russians trust him. And I think what the Russians think is that, the American objective is not really to negotiate strategic limits with the Russians. It's to try to get the Russians and China to agree to joint limits on nuclear weapons, which will leave the United States stronger than both. Now, that is completely unacceptable to the Russians. And China, I think, would not be interested in negotiations of that kind either.
I wonder whether that was part of the reason Trump is so rushed to call Xi Jinping right after Putin's call, because before, like you mentioned, before Putin's call to Xi Jinping, Shoigu was in China for like 24 hours. And so Trump, because I think when you said something to somebody and then you don't deliver, you kind of got a little bit nervous. Okay, well, this person is going to react to this, right? And then he saw Putin and Xi Jinping was talking and they sent the Shoigu, all that kind of thing. He got a little bit unsettled. So he can't help himself but to call Xi Jinping, kind of like trying to figure out what they were talking about. I
think that is the best explanation and analysis of this Trump Xi call that I've heard up to now. I think you got it exactly right. This is very, very much in Trump's character. I mean, outwardly, he likes to appear, the dominant emperor of all he beholds. But I've been told by many people, including people who know him, that deep down, he's very, very insecure. And he's very nervous about what the Russians and the Chinese are saying about him to each other.
Yeah. And he also, I mean, the U.S. government claimed that China conducted a nuclear test, which China denied. And I don't hear anybody giving any evidence of that. Again, they just said that. So is that Trump's way to kind of putting pressure on China somehow? Is that what they're trying to do?
That's exactly what, I mean, they invented it. I don't think anybody in the world believes that China conducted a secret nuclear test. Can I just say, if there had been any possible truth to that story, the European media would have been all over it. Certainly the British media would have been. And they've ignored it, which tells me that there is no truth to this story whatsoever. But again, the Americans are spreading these lies, because that's a lie. I mean, making a false story like that, spreading a false story like that is a lie. And we should call it by that name. Because, again, they want to put China on a back foot in negotiations. And we see that this administration really doesn't have much connection to truth. I mean, they don't really care very much about it.
And in Chinese social media now, they're discussing whether Trump's trip to China is going to be postponed, because so far, Trump's saying that he's going to visit China the first week of April, but there's no exact dates. And I don't see any confirmation from the Chinese side that this is going to happen. So, and considering, he just approved a big arms sales package to Taiwan, and there's dispute in the ports around the Panama Canal. And then, of course, this nuclear treaty thing, he clearly is pressing China. All these things that most clearly is not going to make Chinese government happy. So what do you think?
Well, I don't know what the Chinese government is going to do, but this is what I think. I think that Trump basically invited himself to China. That was very much the impression that I got from the interactions between China and the United States, and between Trump and Xi Jinping last year. I think it was the Americans who first announced, Trump himself who first announced, that he was going to go to China in 2026. Again, he did it in a way that was basically a challenge to China to come out and say this isn't true. And China doesn't like to do that. They don't like to call the president of the United States a liar in that kind of way. So I think he invited himself to China. And again, he's now pushing for a meeting as early as possible in April. I think that quite possibly the Chinese government will decide that a meeting at this time really doesn't make sense and should be postponed. Now, Trump does have his own timetable issues, because over the next few months, at some point in the next few months, we're back into the campaigning season. The midterms are coming. He wants some diplomatic movement early this year. He'd prefer to go to China as soon as possible. He wants to come back with at least some appearance of success in terms of trade and other things. So I think that this is why the pressure from him to come to China as soon as possible is so strong.
Yeah, it is very clear he's going to bring with him some business people, and then a spectacle of signing big deals and stuff like that. That's probably his purpose. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Then he needs China to work with him on this. But
well, he could get it. I mean, this is the point. I mean, this is what is so frustrating. I mean, there was absolutely no reason why he couldn't have gone to China last year and signed all his deals then. But instead we had the tariffs, we had the economic war that raged through the summer, we had the second economic war that raged in autumn, we had all of this, and of course that's not created a good atmosphere in which to sign these deals.
And the US, you see, if Trump really thinks U.S. is a great power, why don't you use your power, do some good? For example, tell the Japanese prime minister to be not so aggressive against China, right? I mean, World War II, U.S. and China was together on the team. It's only reasonable to tell Japan, you cannot do this, redo the history, and you should recognize what you did. And also tell Lithuania, you should correct, you don't provoke China like that. I mean, there's a lot of good things that U.S. could use its influence, but U.S. seems never do that, right?
No, on the contrary, it's trying to egg Japan forward, and it's trying to get Japan to take an ever more aggressive stance. Now, I've been speaking to some of the finance people, and by the way, just to let you know, we had a program on the Duran with a person who works in finance called Ray Zucano, who knows Japan quite well. And he is very, very worried about all of this. I mean, he's worried about the military side of it and the potential for a conflict with China, which he thinks is very real. I mean, but he's also very, very worried, as I know other people are. And just before we're doing this program, I've been reading that this plan to remilitarize Japan, not only can it not work on its own terms, all it can do is provoke China. It will not change the overall balance of power in Asia. It cannot do, because Japan, relative to China, isn't sufficiently powerful to make that change. But what it is going to do is it's going to create enormous financial pressures inside Japan itself. Yeah. Japan does not have the depth of resources, financial resources now, to run a big military industrial program to build up a major military. And that could trigger a potential crisis in Japan, a country with a debt to GDP ratio of around 250%, the worst in the world. And that could have massive international repercussions. And one of the things I've learned is that one of the things that props up the US budget deficit is that people take out loans in yen in very, very low interest rates because Japan has pursued policies of suppressing interest rates. It's done that. They take out loans in yen. They use those yen to buy treasuries. Yeah. So a lot of the treasuries that supposedly Japan has are actually not owned by Japanese. They're owned by people from all over the world, but they're bought using yen. And this props up the US budget and ultimately the entire financial system in the United States. Now, what this enormous military expansion might do is it's going to get the budget deficit in Japan to increase. And it's impossible to see how it cannot. It's going to also generate within Japan itself inflation. And the inflation is going to translate into higher interest rates. In other words, it's going to make holding yen much more costly. Holding yen, taking out loans in yen, much more costly. So that this carry trade of borrowing in yen and buying treasuries might stop. And that's going to have repercussions on the United States itself. And of course, it's not going to do Japan any good either.
Well, Warren Buffett did that. He openly said that, because its interest rate in Japan is zero. So you borrow there and then you buy the dollar and buy the treasury. But
Warren Buffett is far from being the only person to do it. Apparently, as I said, this is why Japan appears to be the world's biggest holder of treasuries. It's not really Japan at all. It's a big misunderstanding of what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, they always do these kind of very complicated financial transactions, and they use this too and that, or leverage and all kind of thing. Yes. And then they come to a point, everything collapses, right? Absolutely. They always do that.
That's exactly what happens. I mean, the more complex a system is, the more certain is that its collapse is going to come. By the way, you remember, I think we talked about Xi Jinping's speech, the one that he made 2 years ago about Shanghai and the financial system in China, which I think I still feel has been much misunderstood in the West, by the way. But I mean, one of the points he was making over the course of that speech is that China needs a simple financial system, one that is geared to help China and Chinese needs. I mean, this enormously complex, very elaborate financial system that we have in the West with derivatives and derivatives on top of derivatives and all kinds of other very strange trades and hedging and all of that, which I'm not going to discuss because well, I'm not sure I understand its complexity myself. I'm not sure anybody does. I mean, that reflects a massively overcomplicated structure, which, if it falls apart, will fall apart completely.
Mhm.
I mean, the thing will be, people always overlook, by the way, about all of these arrangements is that, and this is another point that Xi Jinping was making,
Mhm.
since they're not backed by goods,
Yeah.
and I think this is a point that he was making, since they are not backed by goods, a lot of these deals, trades, and all of this are ultimately works of the human imagination.
Yeah.
And if people stop believing in them, they will have no reality anymore.
No. And on top of that, if you look at Epstein, a lot of the bankers, that's how they make money. So these obscene rich people, what do? They do crazy things.
Yeah.
They go to the Epstein Island. They rape young children. I mean, they rape young women. I mean, it's not good for them either, right? That they make money so easily and so quickly and become so wealthy.
Yes.
And then they get together, do crazy things. So it's just so incredibly wrong in all aspects of it. So.
Well, can I just say this, since you brought this up? I mean, I feel that in the West, in general, there has been a flight from reality altogether, which has been gaining force for quite a long time. And the people on the cutting edge of this are precisely those who work in the financial system, which has been cut. I mean, it's not based on everyday reality anymore. So these people are already living in another reality, if you like. And if you live every day in that kind of way, then all actual limits begin to disappear. So it is completely unsurprising at the end of the day that these people behave in that fashion. I'm going to say something else, and I hope people in China don't understand what I'm saying. I think that this enormous spread of drugs that we see in the West is playing a major role in all of this. I mean, I'm sure that it is increasing the flight from reality as well. And I've never, by the way, taken drugs myself, illegal drugs, at any time, even as a very young person or as a student. But I've had to work with many, many people that do. And one of the things I've noticed is that they do tend to lose touch with reality, and they become more arrogant and more cruel. I mean, because inhibitions fall away, and things which people who are fully in control of themselves and in control of their minds would never do, and people who have strong ethical feelings would never do, for people who are living in that way. And people who work in the financial markets, particularly in my experience, are prone to taking drugs. As I said, that's why inhibitions fall away. I've seen this very often. I've seen many people like that.
And I also think that when you very quickly become wealthy, very easily, you also got a false sense that you are so super good.
Absolutely.
Right?
Everything, absolutely. Everything builds up to that. I mean, you believe that you are the master of the universe, that you walk on clouds, that you are a different person from other people.
Yeah.
And that nothing will ever touch you. And that the people who are not as powerful and as rich as you, they're not ultimately the same as you. They're not of the same species as you, and you treat them very differently because you see them as inferior.
Yeah.
I don't get the sense that's true in China at all, by the way.
Well, part of the reason that there isn't any, I think, a Chinese national, there are some Chinese. Now, I have been going through it, looking for the Chinese part of it. There has been some Chinese Americans, no Epstein, there's some email exchange, but there is no Chinese, as far as I can see so far, there is no Chinese nationals. I think part of it is because the Chinese, Epstein himself is very racist against Chinese. That's part of that. But also, I think the business people or the scholars and professors and, these people, they do tend to constrain themselves a little bit more because the Chinese government are watching them. They are
absolutely.
There are limits you can do in China, so it's a good thing. Eventually, it's a good thing that your government actually put pressure on you in terms of certain moral standards you need to have.
Absolutely,
that's a good thing.
I think that's right. And I think we've discussed this before. I mean, in China, historically, culturally, morality is given a very high place. Yeah. Anybody who knows anything about China, its culture and its history knows this.
Yeah. So I think they should be, all the tech tycoons, all the bankers or academias, they dodge bullets, on this one, because consider how extensive, Epstein's network is, that China is pretty much escaped this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
That's a good thing.
It's not involved at all.
Yeah, but well, speaking of involvement, that this scandal is getting more and more in Europe. It seems like. Not just the British royalties in Britain, but also Norway is heavily involved, and some others. So let's talk a little bit about. So what is going on in terms of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor? They are additional victims that came out and saying they have been raped and by him and stuff. But is there a criminal investigation on him?
None at the moment. There's no talk of one at the moment, by the way. I mean, there's some people who say that he should answer questions, but of course he's not going to answer questions. If there's going to be a criminal investigation of him, it'll be in the United States. But at the moment, there's no sign of that. I don't really see much sign of any criminal investigation of anybody at the moment, if I have to be honest. There's been a major scandal, which I think we talked about last week, involving Peter Mandelson, who was one of Tony Blair's ministers. But the only criminal case that's been opened against him is not about, corruption or bribery or trading in official secrets or anything of that kind. It's misconduct of public office, which is almost impossible to convict someone. I mean, it's a very, very difficult case, as I know myself, to prosecute.
But he was giving Epstein information after a cabinet meeting about what the British government are going to do. I think, is that around the financial crisis in 2008?
Yes.
That's pretty serious misconduct. I mean, it's treason.
Well, I don't think it's misconduct. I think it's far worse things. As far as I'm concerned, that is a breach of official secrets. Yeah. I think that it does go. I mean, it does touch on national security, and beyond that, it is a massive breach of trust, and that does also give rise to all sorts of potential legal consequences. And by the way, there is no doubt about this. But the British authorities have chosen to pursue this as a case of misconduct. And I mean, the reason they've done that is because they don't want this case ultimately to go to trial.
Okay, so they're still covering it up.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, as they were with Andrew as well. By the way, I would be. I mean, Andrew is less important even though he is a member of the royal family, because he's so discredited already that, they might make him, a sacrificial victim in a prosecution. But I personally don't expect that to happen either. I think that the royal family in Britain, the king, who continue to exercise significant influence behind the scenes in Britain, they will tell the authorities, look, whatever he did, he's disgraced and ruined now. We cannot afford a bigger scandal, an even bigger scandal than the one we already have. And for that reason, he shouldn't be prosecuted. And unless, of course, something comes out in all these papers and photographs and films, which it might do, which shows him involved in something so despicable and so horrible that it can't be ignored. But short of that, I really don't think that they will do it.
Yeah, I don't think it either, but that's what angers people. But okay.
Yeah.
Also, is he Peter Mandelson and also this chief of staff who also recently resigned? Morgan McSweeney.
Yeah.
Are they the one who was trying to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn? Is that what was the struggle was? How did
Absolutely.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
can you explain
Absolutely.
that part of the history?
Yes,
I'm a little bit
yes.
curious about that.
I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail about the factions within the Labour Party, but suffice to say that Mandelson and McSweeney know each other. They're very good friends. McSweeney was a protege of Mandelson.
Okay.
So Mandelson's role in British politics goes way back to the 1980s. He's very, very close to Tony Blair. He was considered to be the person who understood how to find donors for the Labour Party and money, to raise money for the Labour Party. And he was also the man who supposedly knew how to run election campaigns. McSweeney was somebody that Mandelson got to know. Mandelson promoted him. Mandelson, to a great extent, trained him. And when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, and he came from a completely different faction. Corbyn belongs to the left of the old traditional left of the Labour Party. He's not corrupt. He's not involved with big money. He wants to pursue more socialist type policies. One shouldn't overstate this. It's not socialism in the way that people in China understand the word. But I mean, it's closer to what Britain is about. And also somebody Corbyn, who strongly opposes all of this trend to militarism, support for Israel, support for Ukraine, involvement in wars. Anyway, Mandelson and McSweeney, immensely hostile. They set up a group called Labour Together, which operated in secret, and it secretly plotted against Corbyn, and it was very, very heavily funded. It received lots and lots of money, and it contacted and had close links with people within the Labour Party's own bureaucracy's office. And basically they engineered the fall of Corbyn. I mean, they made it impossible for Corbyn to lead the Labour Party effectively, and created the conditions which led him first to losing an election and then losing his job.
Turns out Mandelson is the crook, right? So he's the bad guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting you make that point, because for the moment, at least, the media in Britain, which remains very hostile to Corbyn, is not making it. They're not asking themselves the question which you've just implicitly asked. Well, if Corbyn was an honest man and Mandelson was a corrupt man, then who represents good and who represents bad? I haven't seen a single article anywhere in the British media that asks that question.
No reflection, right? For their own
reflection.
Their own fault. Yeah. I mean, these kind of things, you always need the media to help you, right? You instigate and you engineer something, and then the media jump on it and make it worse for. That's how it works. Yeah.
Exactly.
But they always do. The media seems to always do these kind of things, but they never reflect and never apologize, never thinking. Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
So what is this Tim Allan? He's the director of communication. He also resigned. What is his role in this whole thing?
Well, he's the press spokesman, and we don't fully know. And there are reports that a third official, the cabinet secretary, who's a civil servant, but is Britain's most important government, full-time paid civil servant government official under the political leaders. Anyway, there are reports that he's about to be sacked too, or leave his job as well. So I'm going to say what I think. I think that we are not yet anywhere close to learning the full truth about the story. And I think that a lot of people who are close to Starmer are bailing out because they know that everything's going to come crashing down, and they don't want to be there when it happens. That's basically what's going on.
But also, Mandelson also had other scandals before he was appointed, right? So why did Keir Starmer go with this guy who, first of all, is not even that young, and then had bad records in the past? Why did Keir Starmer still appointed him to be the ambassador to the U.S., which is an important post, right?
It's a very important post. And Mandelson wasn't just ambassador to the US, because he was that. But we now know that he was coming to London regularly, that he was still giving advice on how the government should run, that he was speaking with Morgan McSweeney, who was Starmer's chief of staff, continuously. And when there was what we call in Britain a reshuffle, in other words, a reorganization of the government, with some ministers being dismissed and others brought in and others put in different positions, it was Mandelson and McSweeney together who basically worked it out. They picked the ministers, they picked the senior officials. They were basically running the government. I mean, Starmer thought that he was in charge, but they were actually running it. So, I mean, they were two very, very, very powerful people. Now, the thing to say about Peter Mandelson is that there's been scandals about him, many scandals. He's twice been forced to resign from senior government positions. Everybody in British politics knew he was corrupt. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have told you he was corrupt. I mean, I knew that he was corrupt, and I'm not even involved in any of this. I mean, it's hardly a question. It hardly needs speculation. What we didn't all know at that time, a year ago, was how deeply involved with Jeffrey Epstein he was. But the fact that he did know Epstein and had been a friend of his, that was known. I mean, that he was actually giving documents, government documents to Epstein. A year ago, we didn't know that. But other things we did know. So the big question is not just why did Starmer appoint this deeply corrupt man to that very important position, but why did the entire British political class applaud when it was done? Because they did. If you were reading the articles in Britain at the time, this was a diplomatic masterstroke. This is bringing this great, brilliant fixer and genius into a really key position where he would do massive good for Britain and would help British relations with the Americans. So, I mean, they all knew he was corrupt. I suspect many of them knew a lot more than they're saying about his connections with Epstein. They didn't care because they are at a fundamental level deeply corrupt themselves. And of course, when the decision to appoint him was made, nobody expected that the Americans would come along, and because of all this pressure from people like Tom Massey, would release all of this information, which exposed the extent of Mandelson's involvement with Epstein and what he was doing. So this is the true story. There's a lot of lying and hypocrisy here. All sorts of people pretending, we didn't know about Mandelson. It didn't make sense. He lied to us. He breached our trust. Anybody would have known exactly the kind of person that Mandelson was.
Yeah, I think the remarkable thing about this whole thing is that none of these people ever expected they will be exposed one day like this. Yeah.
Well, exactly, and that is a very important part of this story that nobody is talking about. None of this would have ever been exposed in Britain. This entire scandal we only know about because of what happened in the United States. In the United States, as we know, they moved heaven and earth to prevent any of this coming out. Epstein himself died in 2019. Yeah. It's now 2026, and only now is it coming out.
And I think the Justice Department, or maybe the FBI, when they were redacting, I think there's so many places they need to redact that they didn't do a good job, but they couldn't cover everybody. So the Mandelson part maybe wasn't intentional to let people see, but they just did a poor job to redact his name. Because, so for example, the one of the person, the name redacted, this is Sultan Ahmed bin somebody who is from Dubai, right? Yeah. And he wrote this awful email about the torture and something.
Yeah.
But his name originally was redacted, right? And so it's just when Rokana and Thomas Massie insisted these names just got released. So I guess maybe originally Mandelson's name was supposed to be redacted, I guess.
Quite possibly. For all we know, private, unrecorded assurances, promises were given that it would be redacted, that this information would not be published.
Yeah.
Now, we'll probably never find out the truth of that. But if those promises were made, I would not be at all surprised.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the whole thing, Trump lost control of this whole thing? Yes, I don't think Trump ever expected that they would pass a bill, a law to force his Justice Department to release all the documents. Yes. He never expected that.
He never expected that, and of course, it hasn't. The bill hasn't been, the law hasn't been complied with fully. By the way, I mean they're still trying to the best extent that they can to release as little as possible. But that's exactly right. I don't think that he ever expected that he would find himself today, that the West, it's not just the United States, would be in the position today in which it is. I think he knew perfectly well what the realities about Epstein were, but he didn't want the world to know. And he used the story in the election because he knew that this was something that many people cared about. And he wanted to make promises that would make them more likely to vote for him. But he never intended at any time to follow through on those promises.
Another remarkable thing is how much Epstein himself involved in the Middle East affairs. And so not that just this Dubai guy, but also there are somebody from UAE and Qatar. And also he's also seems involved in the Saudi, all these things. He's very heavily involved in all this. He's not a diplomat. Who is this guy?
Well, indeed. I mean, Sophia, that is the big question. I mean, how is it possible for this individual who has no formal status in any government? He's not a public servant. He's not a civil servant. He's not a diplomat himself. How is it possible for him to develop an enormous network on this scale and to exercise such incredible influence? Because he does. I mean, he's talking about picking deputy secretary generals of NATO, and he's meeting with key ambassadors. He's giving advice on foreign policy. He's trying to shape foreign policy. He's trying to shape economic policy. How is he able to do that? And that is the mystery that nobody has provided any explanation for. Just as the mystery of his money remains, it doesn't just remain, it's grown greater. Somebody added up all of the money that he paid out to various people over a period of, I think it was 10 years. And it came to well over $1 billion. Well over $1 billion. He was never believed to be worth more than $500 million. So how did he become rich in the first place? It now seems that his brief stint as a dealer for Bear Stearns ended in disaster, and that he left Bear Stearns before he was sacked for apparently criminal misconduct.
Yeah.
So how did he make his money?
There's some information about that, which also tells us that, they still have a lot that haven't released. Yeah. Okay. He might have something to do with the 2008 financial crisis, because now Mandelson actually is an interesting case, because if Mandelson is providing information about the British government's reaction to this financial crisis, of course, Epstein would be interested in what the United States government is going to do. Yeah. But from the files we've seen so far, there's very, very little mention about his role in the 2008 financial crisis. And it is known that he and the Bear Stearns, even though he left the Bear Stearns, but they got a joint ventures somewhere in the Cayman Island. And they must have done something really questionable. And that's probably where he got lots of money. At least he helped with money laundering operations. He definitely involved in that. But that's probably where the still secret files will give us answers about the 2008. What is he doing? It is very odd that there's considering how much he's involved in the UK, Britain, but not much was mentioned about his role with the US government, the Federal Reserve, the Treasurer, stuff like that.
I'm going to make a few comments, actually. The first thing is that he did receive very large payments. I mean, he once received $150 million from the CEO of some company. Yeah. And the FBI is saying that there's no actual explanation of why such a huge amount of money was paid to him. Yeah. So, I mean, he does receive a lot of big payments. And the CEO in question, who's still around, by the way, is not really providing any coherent explanations. So he didn't receive money. And again, one does wonder why and what he was doing. The second, about the fact that we know an awful lot about his activities in Britain, but less about what were probably much, much bigger activities in the United States, is absolutely true. But then that might be a reflection of the actions of the US authorities, which is that the US authorities are probably very, very nervous about disclosing things about the United States, but they might be more relaxed about disclosing things that happened in Britain. So it might not reflect a great deal of what Epstein was doing. It may not give an accurate sense of the proportion of his actions. I mean, he probably was far more heavily involved in things going on in the US than we know. But the third is, and I think this is the key thing to remember, and which nobody is saying, which is that what we're basing everything on is emails and videos and photos that Jeffrey Epstein himself retained. And it's highly likely that this is only a fraction of what he was up to. I mean, if he was really involved in all sorts of covert activities, if he was meeting Mossad, for example, it's unlikely, it seems to me, that he would have made or kept a written record of it. So, I mean, that is the other thing to remember about Epstein. We're only seeing probably a fragment of the whole picture. By the way, this is a work for generations. I mean, 10 or 20 years' time, people will still be working through all of this material and trying to put the pieces together and answer these questions, if they're allowed to, which they might not be, of course.
Do you think Keir Starmer can weather this out, can overcome the crisis right now?
No, nobody thinks he can. I mean, if you go to the British media, you can see that he can't. There was an admission in the British media this morning that he cannot sack a particular minister, a man called Wes Streeting, who is openly plotting against Keir Starmer. That Starmer's position is now so weak that he can't sack him. So, I mean, Starmer is not really in control of the government any longer. If he can't sack a minister, then he's not able to exercise authority over ministers. And if he can't exercise authority over ministers, he can't implement policy. And doesn't seem as if he has much policy to implement anyway. So he occupies the position of prime minister, but he's not doing the job of prime minister anymore. The only reason he's still there is because the Labour Party, his party, has not yet figured out who is going to replace him. And I think, again, I mentioned in our programme last week, there are some important elections in Britain coming up. Everybody expects Labour to lose them badly. And nobody wants to be the person who's just taken over as leader of the Labour Party and who starts as leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister with major election defeats. So this is why, for the moment at least, Starmer's most important rivals are holding off. He's probably got a few weeks, up to May, some people are saying, maybe no further than the end of this month. There's an important parliamentary by-election on the 26th of February. But at some point over the next few weeks or months, he'll be gone.
Actually, that was my next question, is who's going to replace him? But right now, there is no one. Okay.
No, there is no clear person. And this is a major problem, because if you look at the political situation in Britain, the quality of people who are there is extremely low, very, very poor. There was an article that appeared in a British newspaper comparing a contest for who would become leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister in 1976 and today. And I mean, you had really interesting, towering, important, powerful people in 1976. And as this article said, the people today are pygmies. They are non-entities.
Yeah, they don't want to have another Liz Truss debacle. Remember, the Conservative, they had that. They pushed it through an election and then pick somebody who's really not qualified. And it was a debacle, right?
Yes, but it doesn't. Nobody looks very qualified. That's the trouble. I mean, Liz Truss, by the way, is a fairly representative example of modern British politicians.
Why is that? Why there isn't any good candidates right now?
This is an enormously important question, which is never asked sufficiently, and to which I myself don't have the answer. Something happened in British politics about 20, 30 years ago. There's a book an important book by a British journalist called Peter Oborne, which is called The Rise of the Political Class, in which he said that what happened in Britain was that politicians, as they had been, leading real political parties anchored in British society, were replaced by a political elite which is completely professional. In other words, the only thing they do is politics, and which has no real connection to the people of Britain or to social forces within Britain, and that this elite governs entirely for itself and is unattractive. So people, who might have imagination and energy and who might want to be willing to do things, don't want to come forward and become part of politics. And there aren't the great social institutions, the trade unions, the business lobbies, all of those kind of things that used to exist in Britain, out of which important people would once come. So this is perhaps one of the reasons. But this is an enormous question, and nobody has really answered it, or really even properly asked it.
And it also, I find it's highly unusual that right now there is a crisis both for the royal families and the British government, right? So it's normally there's a scandal on this side, but the other side is fine. Yes. But right now it's both, right? That's a very serious situation, isn't it?
You're the first person I know who's made that point. It hadn't even occurred to me, but you're absolutely correct. And that is extremely different. And it does demonstrate the extent of the crisis, actually, that every part of the British elite is implicated in some way.
And it's not just in Britain, Norway. Their former prime minister is under investigation. And he was the chair of the Nobel Peace Prize committee. Thinking about that, he was vacationing with Jeffrey Epstein. I couldn't believe it. When I read it, it was like, okay, now we know why they always pick the so interesting, disregarded and nobody respected people to win the award. Now we know that. Why?
Well, indeed. So that is an extraordinary revelation, because that particular politician, whose name I never can remember, but he's actually quite a well-known person in European politics. He was often put forward as, the voice of ethics and values and principles. Norway, by the way, partly because it administers the Nobel Prize, has generally up to now had a very good reputation in Europe. Undeserved, in my opinion, but there it is.
Thorbjørn Jagland, that's his name, Thorbjørn Jagland.
That's right.
Yeah,
Jagland.
Yeah. I think that's another good news for China, because Norway is among they have some kind of a human rights group, their regular meeting there, and they always criticize China. And of course, they always giving a Nobel Peace Prize to people who are anti-China, like in the Dalai Lama. And now here we see, this guy is corrupt. So China won it without doing anything this round. So,
well, that's right. That's absolutely right. Yes.
Where do we go from here? I do find that this whole thing, normally it's the United States lead the way, the Europeans following it. But in this case, it seems like the fact that in Norway, in Britain, in Europe now, all over the place, people are investigating, resigning and apologizing, all that sort of thing, is more or less putting some pressure on the United States. So this time is a little bit like a reverse to the normal trend, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's absolutely correct. Now, the thing is that one of the revelations is the extent to which there is a single political class across the West. Okay. So Epstein is busy in the United States, but he's also busy in Europe, and all of these people know each other, meet each other, and do all the terrible things that they do together. Yep. But there doesn't seem to be a real difference based on nations. I mean, you don't have people coming along and saying, I am the Prime Minister of Norway, my priorities are Norway. Or a person like Mandelson in Britain saying, my fundamental loyalty and concern is for Britain. They're all part of this club, this group of people together. But of course, inevitably, even as there are so many people in Europe who are involved in all of this, it is anchored in the United States, because that is where the power and the money ultimately is centered. So the point is that there may have been some attempt by the US authorities to restrict information about what Americans in the United States had been up to. But ultimately, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, because the Europeans, precisely because they're part of the same network, what they did ultimately comes back into the United States and destabilizes the system there, because they're all the same. They're all functioning together in exactly the same way.
Well, but there are many things that the repercussions of even though I'm sure there's people who deserve to be in jail, but will never be in jail, okay? But it does shake the foundation of lots of things. So, for example, people used to think highly of Bill Gates, for example, right? All those rich, in particular tech billionaires, because they are so smart and they will give away their money. They're doing so much good for the society, all that kind. I think it's all facade. The whole thing is falling down. So now we see who they really are. They're despicable people and somehow get rich, many times maybe illegally, right? And hurting the public. That's how they get their money. And then they get together when they become rich and powerful. They get together doing awful things. That seems like the ruling class is today.
Absolutely. I mean, what we're looking is a crisis of the ruling class across the West. Obviously, it's centered in the United States. And it does say something, that there are still mechanisms in the United States to expose these things, because it would never have been exposed in Britain. I mean, I think that's an important thing to say, or in France, or in Germany, or in any such country.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that we've gone this far is already a miracle. I do think we should really, I think there are people emerge as heroes like Thomas Massey and O'Connor. They are the heroes. And the victims, they're relentlessly fighting for their rights, fighting their day on court. And then whatever they're fighting for, there are several of them that I really think they are the heroines. And so it also shows that, United States, there's still good Americans,
There's still good Americans. And there are still, then there are also good people within the political system. I can't say the same for Britain, by the way. And that there are still mechanisms which just about work and which they can still use.
Yeah. Which is why Trump is so surprised and is so shocked by this whole thing. Yes. Because I think he totally convinced himself he could absolutely just let this thing go, and people not happy for 2 weeks and then move on. But people just won't move on. I think that's very remarkable. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Are you aware that Weiwei, remember him, has now suddenly turned against the West?
Yes.
He gave a big interview to the London Times.
Oh, okay.
And you could see that the reporter from the London Times was expecting him to say the usual things about China, came away very upset and very, very shocked.
Yeah.
And Weiwei said all the things that we often say about China. This is not a belligerent country. This is not an aggressive country. That this isn't our civilization at all. He clearly, either he's trying to get himself back into China because things are not going so well for him in Europe, and he's thinks that maybe the pastures are greener back home. I'm a bit suspicious of Weiwei, I have to say. Or alternatively, he has generally had a great moment of disillusion and recognition that the West isn't what it pretends to be. But I read all of this whole piece in the London Times with amusement and astonishment, and you could sense the reporter getting more and more angry as the interview proceeded. I was surprised that it was published at all, to be honest.
I read his interview with the Wall Street Journal before he went to China. I think he is possibly right now in China.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. He said in that interview, he was going to visit his mother, who is 96 years old. So it is possible he's trying to make his way back. It is highly unusual for somebody like that who has so many bad things. They would allow him to go back to China. Here's the thing. You need to know that his father belongs to the older generation revolutionaries. So he's privileged in a way. And I suspect that based on his age, he probably knows Xi Jinping. He mentioned that. He knows Xi Jinping. Yeah. Not well. He said he doesn't know him well. My suspicion is the two of them has nothing in common, to talk about. But they probably belong to this circle of people whose parents, are involved in the revolutionary activities. So I think that's part of it. He is privileged, bottom line. And then he was highly critical during the Gaza crisis, the genocide in Gaza. He saw that and he expressed the frustration, and that got him pretty much the West and kind of like, no, you're not supposed to say that, and so they canceled the several exhibition. And so I think that's probably get him rethinking the whole thing. I think that has something to do with it. So it's a combination of things.
I'm no fan, I should say. I mean, his artistic qualities, I'm perhaps not the only person to judge them. I don't think much of them either, to be honest. I think they're very, very overrated myself. But anyway, it was interesting, and as I said, it did create quite a stir here in London. This article in I didn't realise he'd also done one for the US media as well.
Yeah, and
go on.
No, I don't like his art either. I never quite understand his art either. But I only know him as a China critic, a very famous China critic. Yes. But it's interesting, as you said, he seems like it turned against the West or something, and that's immediately get him into trouble, right? You're supposed to have freedom of speech, but you don't really have freedom of speech.
No, exactly. Exactly.
But it is, and he's not alone. There is what's interesting is in China, and I'm sure in Russia, the countries always have some people worship the West, deeply worship the West, and that they are all very quiet now. I mean, how do you defend something like the Epstein scandal? How do you defend that? Right?
Absolutely. I know many Russians like this, by the way.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's a reckoning moment for the world. I think East and West, everywhere, it's a reckoning moment.
Yes. My oldest and best Russian friend is a Russian businessman who was very, very pro-Western at one time. And I mean, he's now gone completely to the other side. and so much so that he will never, even though he can travel to the West, he refuses to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Okay.
Very interesting. Very interesting times. Yeah.
Very interesting times. Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll speak next week. Have a great day. Have a great day, Sophia.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.